Welcome back to AI Diatribe, everybody. I am Jason Lowe. I am your host. I am joined by Matt Conweiser, my co-host. And today we have Piotr Byrski, who happens to be the CEO and co-founder of Molecule.one. Now, for some of you that have followed my little news posts and things that I do on social media under Jason Lowe on AI, a few weeks ago, I pointed out something that was a really interesting development with Molecule.one. We'll get into that in a little bit. For those that don't know, Piotr is not an old guy by any means. He's a young scientific mind that's doing a lot of great things at a very early age compared to us older guys. And so he was a member of the board for Collegium Invisible. He was organic chemistry intern at the University of Warsaw. He is an actual doctor that graduated from the University of Warsaw, and he also got his bachelor's there. So he's a double University of Warsaw alum, and he got his bachelor's in chemistry, which is a subject that I admire you, man. When it comes to chemistry, I am lost. That is like the one science that there is nothing that I can do. It just completely escapes me. But I think probably a good thing to point out is that the reason of the social media post that I made is because Molecule.one was using AI, specifically OpenAI, in a very unique way. So 10,080 reactions in 3 months. That's a number to remember. So a bench chemist, someone who's just doing things on a bench, just doing testing manually, they'll get there in about a decade. It takes about a decade for a bench chemist to actually do that many reactions to test things out. And so keep that in mind as we head forward. But let me go ahead and Piotr, why don't we turn it over to you? Tell us a little bit about your story. I personally would love to hear about you being in Poland. Now you're in the United States, and when did you come over? What caused that? What's the Molecule.one origin story? Give us the scoop, my man.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jason. It's really awesome to be here. Matt, thanks to you as well. So I'm really with you on this being lost with chemistry, because I did, for my undergrad, I did a double major, chemistry and maths. And that particular double major makes you really frustrated every time you go into the lab. Because math teaches you like really exact reasoning, like you try, like proofs have to be very rigorous. Everything has a reasoning chain, a reasoning trace. And then you start learning chemistry from textbooks. You learn, okay, this reaction should work that way. This experiment should work that way. And then you go into the lab, nothing works the way it's supposed. So that kind of, this particular frustration is I'd say crucial to the Molecule.one origin story, because we both, me and my co-founder Pavel, shared this background, and this is the first time we really became deeply interested. Okay, like what if there was a better way to do it? What if there was a more automated way of performing the experiments, but also performing the reasoning and translating them to our understanding of the science in the real world? After college, I graduated from a medical school, became really close to becoming a practicing physician, ultimately decided to do something that scales a bit quicker than just physician work. But what stayed with me is the motivation. Like it's really a powerful experience when you see both patients that receive a novel treatment, receive a drug that has just been discovered, and those that still wait. My favorite story in this regard is hepatitis C, which when I started medical school, it was an incurable disease. And I remember one of my professors saying it will be the HIV of the 21st century in terms of the impact of the public health impact. By the time I graduated, it was a 12-week oral drug course with a 90+% cure rate, not treatment response rate, absolute cure rate. That's what the drug discovery is to me. That's what chemistry is to me in terms of how it can change people's lives, actual people's lives. Now, coming back to you asked me also about the coming to the United States. So we view Molecule.one as a Polish-American company, and that has gone on for some time. So we're originally from all three founders are originally from Poland, and still majority of the operations, including our lab, is that achieved this discovery in the collaboration with OpenAI is in Poland, but we've collaborated a lot with American companies. We've raised money here, and we decided earlier this year, actually about 6 months ago, we decided it's time for us to open a permanent presence here. So we're opening a second lab. First one in Warsaw, second lab is here. will be here in San Francisco, California, to double down on the American market. And some people have asked me the question, okay, why did you move to the US, but also why California in particular? The shortest answer I've given is customers, investors, and AGI. These are the three things that are maxed out here. And this is why I've moved here.
Makes sense. Well, and I'll give it to Matt here in just a second, but I am a little curious. I mean, you started out as a retrosynthesis reaction company, which is basically doing things on software, simulating different reactions on software. But then at some point, you made the decision to become an actual physical microliter lab. When did you decide that software wasn't enough? What made you make that decision?
Yes. So the first thing we fought to do with my co-founders is why don't we give chemists a tool to figure out how molecules are made? And this is what chemists call retrosynthesis. It's an analogy I like to use is cooking. You basically look at what you need to cook, and you you work your way towards ingredients. Kind of that's why the retro prefix. And the way that it has been done, people have tried to crack this problem of like teaching computers how to do retrosynthesis since the 1970s. The first retrosynthesis program was developed by the guy who coined the word retrosynthesis and got a Nobel Prize for developing the principles. Professor E.J. Corey was the original developer of retrosynthesis as a concept, but also he developed the concept exactly because he wanted to teach computers how to plan chemistry, how to plan making molecules. It was at the time like he was ahead of his time, as many geniuses are, and like neither the algorithms nor the computational power was there. So within the last roughly, I'd say, decade, we've had a resurgence of interest in retrosynthesis, powered by the advent of deep models coupled with enormous computational power. And we were the pioneers of that. We developed the first commercial software for retrosynthesis that was based on deep learning, as opposed to handwritten rules, which was, or the original Corey idea, but also like it was the paradigm for the next 50 years. So we got there a few years ago. We quickly got to paying customers, but we very quickly hit a ceiling on how good the software could perform. Specifically, we were making a lot of headway with the model improvements, model innovation. But as with other deep learning applications, if some knowledge is not in the data, the models will not conjure it out of thin air. And the quality and quantity of data that was available for training of retrosynthesis models, just not enough, just plainly not enough. So we had a thought, okay, if we're really serious about this, if we really believe that AI should transform completely how chemical synthesis is done, we need to go all the way through. We need to not stop at the model layer, but we need to move to the real world to actually be able to. And so that's how the lab was born. A very interesting point there is, and I think like one of the keys to our success with OpenAI and with other commercial partners is that we built the lab, and the lab was opened 4 years ago, 2022. We built the lab with AI as the designated user in mind. Before anyone ever heard the term agentic AI outside of a very niche group. And we think that it's actually fundamental that you need to pick a lane between whether you're building a tool to help human scientists do science, or are you trying to build a new way of doing science? Trying to build both at the same time is very hard, I would say impossible, and they have different vices and virtues. We have been very adamant that we're not building a tool like after like we took the retrosynthesis algorithm, but then we stopped building a tool that was meant to help existing workflows function, and instead switched to building a new type of science.
Interesting.
So let me ask you this, and I was going to give you a multiple choice option, but I think some of the things you just talked about have forced my hand a little bit in terms of where I want to go first. By the way, I will, just to keep everybody in suspense, I asked Claude Fable, one of the most advanced reasoning models out there, about you and your company, and I told it to find the most scandalous and controversial things I could bring up on this. And I will save that for a little while from now. But it is related. And here's the question. So you talked about hepatitis C. Right. And I can think of two very keen examples of similar paths as it relates to healthcare and research. And the first is taking aspirin to mitigate or reduce colon cancer, which was discovered in 1980 and dismissed because the doctors were looking at it and saying, no, like that's trivial. That's
Yes.
got to be anecdotal. There's no way that that's correlated. It can't be that simple. The other one was actually something that IBM's Watson used as a case study in the mid 20-teens. And I was at IBM at the time, but I wasn't involved in this. I was working in AI for cybersecurity at that point. But the case was around Kawasaki's, and it was a situation of a child that had been admitted to a hospital and nobody could figure out what was wrong. And the Watson system had said, well, does the child have bloodshot eyes? And the nursing staff said, well, of course, he's exhausted. He hasn't slept for 3 days. So they said yes. And the system said Kawasaki's. And they tested him and it was Kawasaki's. And it was because it was a symptom that the practitioners had overlooked so often because so many people present with it that they didn't bother to consider that comorbidity with everything else to realize it led to an entirely new differential. So where do you see the use of Molecule.one's technologies and other advances as it relates to finding those trivial but very not trivial developments and advancements in chemistry and in medicine?
I actually love those two examples, and they point out to, I'd say, a broader trend, kind of what I've also been trying to separate in those two lanes, where you develop a tool to help people, and the other where you develop a new workflow that is more end to end. And I think that those two examples show that human biases are one of the things that AI really can help to overcome. And this doesn't mean AI is smarter than us. It just means it has different biases and virtues. For example, if OpenAI was allowed us to publish on their website the reasoning traces for the discovery that we made with them. This is absolutely fascinating read, because on one hand, you see places where the reasoning gets a little bit sloppy. And maybe if you try to apply a human standard to it, it would be is this actually a chemists? Is this a chemical reasoning? But you see other places where it makes really interesting connections that got proven experimentally. And I think this is an extreme strength of models, that they can read all the papers that are out there, which is impossible for any given human. They can make connections between those papers, which becomes very computationally intensive, but because or n-squared connections between papers. But those connections lead it to making conclusions that are not trivial for humans. So to use the particular example of the joint discovery of OpenAI, the Chon-Lam coupling is very widely used in the pharmaceutical industry as a process to obtain certain numerous classes of compounds. Normally, it's done with just air as the source of oxygen because it needs oxygen to proceed. The key idea that GPT Maria system proposed in our collaboration is that the air as a source of oxygen might be not enough, and you need to add an extra source of oxygen into the reaction mixture. Taken that proposal out of GPT, shown it to PhD chemists, and chemists are like, nah, that's not how you do it. You do it the oxygen in the air is enough. You're going to spur God knows how many side reactions. You're going to have trouble, etc. We tested the idea and it worked perfectly. The gains were very significant in the gains in the reaction yield, which means how efficient the reaction was, but also in improving the exact things the chemists were worried about, like the side product profile.
So on that topic, because I had mentioned that I had asked Fable to dig up some dirt on you, and it's somewhat related to that. And I think I want to trace a little bit back to more of your origins, and I'm going to ask you this as kind of a bridge. So if you're interested, what Fable told me was basically you're the nicest person on the planet. It actually could not find any junk, any controversies, anything about your Molecule.one. So congratulations. The one thing it did ask me to point out, and this kind of goes back to tracing to the origins of how you built what you built and how you're monitoring it, is it did call out that your preprint was called Trustworthy Retrosynthesis Eliminating Hallucinations, but your website now says Mitigating Hallucinations, which means that you softened your position on the topic of hallucinations just a little bit. So on this theme, right, of diagnosis and bias and everything else, we still have the problem of hallucination. And by the way, I don't like that term. It is confabulation, not hallucination, if we're going to be technical about it. Jason's laughing because I say that every damn time I have a chance. But when you go back to why you built the company and why you do what you do, as I would say, a more autonomous AI environment than many other healthcare or research related businesses, how do you handle that? How do you make sure that the thing isn't going off the rails, either because it ingested some bad research or incorrect information, or it transcribed a handwritten note that had the wrong dosage on it, which is something that has happened, why they started requiring a leading zero when doctors are writing out dosages? Like, I mean, how do you kind of separate fact from fiction and understand what's real and what isn't with a human less in or on the loop in your business model?
That's a very interesting thing, because the whole notion of hallucinations or confabulations, lowering the rate of those, is trying to get the models to output something that a human, in this case, a human expert, human chemist, would look at and say, oh yeah, that's reasonable. That's a good proposal. And that's, I'd say, largely a solved problem in retrosynthesis used like for typical pharmaceutical products. We can get for, I'd say, probably over 90% of molecules, we can get a viable pathway to you with the models that we use right now. The problem
so I want to interject here for a second. If
Go for it.
For clarification, we need to make sure that everybody understands that the reason that Molecule.one made some serious noise recently is that using OpenAI, let's just call it using OpenAI, they had the equivalent of an OpenAI agentic AI entity that proposed a possible solution to a problem related to the production of drugs and being able to make enough of a particular molecule type that makes drugs happen. Okay. And it proposed 4 different things, which then in the lab, 1 was disproven, 2 were proven, and one of those 2 became the headline. So basically a 25% hit rate. Okay, that's pretty darn remarkable. I mean, we'll need to talk about what the human baseline is that we're comparing that against. But the thing that is unique about this situation is that it was a novel concept. It was a novel proposal, something that hadn't been thought of before by human beings, and that the AI actually made the proposal of, hey, you know what, let's do this, let's try this and see what happens. And so I think it's important that the listeners understand that going in. So let's go back then to the human baseline we're comparing that against. Is 25% a pretty good hit rate compared to what humans actually are able to do?
I'd say the hit rate was actually 50%, with the potential of going up to 75, because we clearly proved not only the one that became the headline, but also another one that we have kept internally for the time being. And I think this is really remarkable. I think it's still a small sample, not enough to draw like a statistically significant conclusion. But if every second hypothesis that the human makes was proven in the lab, it'd be much more efficient with every scientific endeavor that we undertake in chemistry. And so it connects very nicely to like the combating hallucinations or confabulations. Yes, hallucinations or confabulations, because we're much farther along in producing an output that the human likes than producing an output that actually is proven out experimentally. So for example, we did some benchmarking work, and we can solve more than 90% of typical medicinal chemistry molecules, meaning that we get the molecule, the software proposes a way to make it, and an expert chemist looks at it and says, yes, that's plausible. That's a good way to make it. But if you then try to move into predicting the actual outcome of experiments, human performance is, in the benchmarks that we use internally, it's typically between 60 and 65%, which is low. Like randomly trying to assign experiments into failing and succeeding gives you, like after balancing, gives you a 50% success rate. So humans achieving 65% is actually pretty low. The models, if they have data, get to 95% accuracy on that metric. And this is the change that we're talking about. We're kind of like beyond fighting hallucinations in the traditional sense, because that's useful as a tool to think about it, but not directly useful commercially. But the only thing that is the final test, the final verification, is the experiment. And that's what we're optimizing towards. And that's also how the collaboration with OpenAI was unique, because we were able to prove that the model contributes in the real world, not just produces something that a chemist looks at and says, yeah, that's cool.
And what made you choose that model from that company as opposed to all the others? Because there's a lot of open source, there's Gemini, there is Claude, there's why OpenAI and why ChatGPT?
We've worked with a few frontier models. The deepest collaboration to date we've had with is obviously with OpenAI. And the main reason collaboration came to fruition is that we're really aligned in thinking how frontier AI can change science. If you look at OpenAI's even published strategy by Sam Altman and Jakub Pachocki, their chief scientist, you're going to see they named three main goals for the company. And one is outright creating an AI scientist. Another one is putting that AI scientist to work to impact the economy. So we share that view very much. We think that this is the most impactful thing that AI can do. And also that the way is to combine specialist models like the ones that we've developed with a top frontier model like GPT to work together, steer the lab, and make the real discoveries.
And so AI ethics is very important to me. Very, very important to me. In case I didn't mention it, it's very important to me. So Sam Altman has publicly said that ethics and governance will take a back seat if he feels that China is getting ahead of us competitively. He will just shelve it as a priority. Until that happens, absolutely the most important thing. So with your model and with your partnership, how are you implementing ethics as an organization, even if your partners end up diverging from you in terms of your alignment around that?
Overall, I think applying AI to do chemistry, or in the broader sense, life science with experimental, is one of the places where it seems relatively easy. Well, maybe easy is the wrong word, but like it seems possible to control for a long time. And the reason I think that is the physical verification layer is going to be necessary for a long, long time. I don't see simulations becoming accurate enough to replace experiments for the foreseeable future, I'd say.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because you can see the same thing going on in robotics, right? I mean, there's only so much you can do in a virtual environment. You have to bring it to the real world to make it actually happen. So I see what you're saying.
And so if you would be worried, for example, about the risk of developing harmful chemicals, like, I don't know, like chemical weapons or other chemicals meant to cause harm, not do good, this is not possible without the physical layer, which is highly specialized and relatively easy to control. Well, first of all, if it doesn't get into the wrong hands. And second of all, if we are talking about the probability of doom, P-doom scenarios, even if we would think that there could be a rogue AI model that like is determined to cause harm to humans, we would see which molecules it orders from suppliers, which molecules it puts onto the platform. The physicality of it makes it, I think, at least conceptually, makes the control much easier. And that's how we think about it.
On that topic, right? Because we talk about ethics and causing harm, and like, I'll give you a medical version, chemotherapy, right? I mean, these drugs are designed to kill fast-growing, healthy cells because they also kill cancer cells, right? If you look at the topic of chemotherapy, there could be two potential outcomes with an AI-enhanced version, right? Road one is more aggressive, more powerful, more effective, but also more harmful, which means you have to create more remedies to try and handle the side effects. The other could be less effective, but virtually no side effects because it tries something that nobody's tried before and it actually works. Which of those routes would you consider to be more ethical and more advancing for human health? The one that is more aggressive against cancer, even though the side effects are more severe, or one that is maybe less effective but more sustainable with virtually no side effects? And where would a model make that judgment if it's being autonomous in its decisions?
I would say this is a decision that I still see as very crucial to be left in human hands. And the way the framework, like, I don't think there is an answer like first is better, second is better. The way to think about it, and that is grounded in medical ethics and deontology, and basically the principle of first do no harm and the risk management methods, is that for a cancer, like cancer is very heterogeneous, obviously. For a cancer that already has good therapeutic options, like throwing a very powerful chemotherapeutic, like with lots of side effects, is just probably not the right idea. Whereas if we're talking about pancreatic cancer or glioblastoma or any of the ones that really don't have a therapeutic option, well, I think first of all, you need to still have informed consent at the level of clinical trials. But I think it's an interesting discussion of whether AI could also allow the regulators like the FDA or EMA to be a bit more lax in allowing for clinical trials in certain indications where there is no good therapeutic option. This will be the framework I would think about. And there's a lot more examples on both sides, obviously.
I want to kind of swing this back a little bit more on the functional AI side of things. And I'm going to make a comparison here that maybe doesn't seem obvious initially. Let's talk about the Erdős problems, shall we? I think it's very interesting that, the AI mathematician named Aristotle was able to solve number 124. There's also been some work done on the unit distance conjecture recently. This is all very great and innovative. But one of the things that I have seen amongst online discussion, both within the expert community as well as the not expert community that just consider themselves mathematician hobbyists, is that there really wasn't anything novel in the discovery. It was just a recombination of something that humans probably should have figured out, but they just didn't take the time to do. Now, when we're talking about the Molecule.one situation, the novel discovery was significant. I mean, mean yield went from 16.6% to 25.2%. That's basically what, a 60-something% increase in yield. That's massive. That's a really big deal. But let's take this same question that many people are applying to the Erdős problems and say, was what happened a true discovery, or was it a systematic rediscovery at a scale that nobody had even bothered?
Well, I think there's an interesting question of, if we try to apply this standard to human-led discoveries, are those true discoveries? To use the common phrase, all scientists are standing on the shoulders of giants. And I think that AI is too, to an extent, although it brings this new ways to think about those problems in. We call this engineered serendipity because, to use the OpenAI collaboration as an example, a human would not have designed and executed 10,000 reactions in that time frame. Actually, we executed about 30,000 across the 4 proposals. The 10,000 was just dedicated to the published one. And in particular, a human would typically have lower experimental budget, and the tempo reagent, which turned out to be this big boost, would likely be the first one to throw out because it was the most unconventional idea among probably around 10 tests. So I'd say that one thing that I think a lot of people do is try to come up with a much higher standard than we're applying to human-led science and apply it to the applications of AI to science. And I think that's the wrong way to think about it. I was never a professional mathematician, but I do have math background. So I was really excited to read the unit distance solution. And I can tell you a lot of people were working on that. It's not that we didn't put brain power into this problem. And I think that's a really nice example of AI-led science and human-led science jointly contributing to scientific progress, because a few mathematicians immediately improved upon the result. But if you're a mathematician, you know that going from 1 to 1 plus a very small number for that problem, for the boundary, was much bigger of a breakthrough than going from 1 plus an extremely small number to 1 plus a larger number. The gap that GPT closed, I would say, was much more significant. And I think that's really exciting. Also, that's how science happens. My co-founder Stan calls it cross-pollination. Basically, if you know enough, if you read enough papers, if you have enough experience one way or the other, you're going to have ideas come to you from very different sources. For example, in this case, GPT proposed to use tempo for CHAN-LAM because it recognized that CHAN-LAM is a copper-catalyzed reaction, that copper changes its oxidation state in the CHAN-LAM catalytic cycle, which means during the reaction. And that in other reactions where the same things happen, so copper is the catalyst and it changes in oxidation state, tempo helped. And it said, why not here? I think that's a very human way of doing things. That's a very, I could see a chemist doing that, definitely.
Yeah, that's kind of how a lot of stuff has been discovered, right? Just
exactly.
What's one of the craziest things we can do right now that might actually be able to be proved or not proved? Let's try that. Just for the sake of trying to get the craziest use case out of the way, and then boom, it happens. But
yes,
or entirely accidental stuff like Teflon, right?
But you also touched on an angle that's actually quite interesting, because we're talking about people holding AI-driven science to a higher standard. How related to that is the P-Doom score? right? Maybe this is why people are looking at that much differently.
Maybe.
Well, actually, it's a great tie into the PDOOM score and a number of other things we talked about. And I've been throwing some tough questions at you throughout this, and I appreciate you taking them head on. I'm going to ask you something of a softball question now. And here it is. And it's the hardest softball you're ever going to get.
I was just going to say that this is the one I'm worried about.
Where do you think Molecule.one and other chemistry and healthcare related research firms that use AI as heavily as you do can take us? Do you, in 5 or 10 years from now, are we curing things that we didn't think were curable, like your hepatitis C example? Are we developing therapies that can just manage people and sustain people? Are we creating profit centers for drug companies where it's more profitable to treat than to cure? Or are we coming up with good for all? Where do you see this big balance of things going with this incredible ability that AI is giving us?
The future I'm working towards, and we as Molecule.one are working towards, is a future where not only it's more efficient in terms of time and cost to discover a new therapy, which we want, like, I want this to trickle down to people. Like, the current system is imperfect, but it's the best one we have. And I think like there's a clear argument for why certain drugs are expensive, because they need to cover the R&D cost. Like, covering the R&D cost is important. But that's also why I'm excited about lowering the R&D cost and improving the economics there. And maybe one direction I'm particularly excited about is personalized medicine. So I think like right now, one of the saddest type of stories that I know of is that there are drugs that have been proven, or at least there is a very good argument they will be efficacious, but they sit on someone's shelf because the patient population is too small to justify an investment in them. And that is just sad. That is really fucking sad. And it like actually angers me to even think about it. So I think like one of the really big benefits of improving the economics and maybe but it also has to go hand in hand with the regulatory system, is that if we lower the bar for certain clinical trials, it might make sense to do a clinical trial with less funding, with a lower budget. And the expectation for return will be lower, like still be a lot of money, but like it wouldn't be necessarily like 20 billion a year for a blockbuster. But that would mean those people will get a treatment option that they don't have today. And that's one of the aspects of the future I'm most excited about. We're going to be definitely working towards that. I do hope that a lot of other companies that I admire that work on AI for toxicity, that work on AI for better clinical trial stratification, etc., will contribute from that side. And we're going to get to this future where it's just much easier for people to get a drug to the market and get it tailored to the specific population that will benefit from that drug the most.
You're touching on something that is a real hot point for me as someone that pays attention to the economic side of things and specifically the macroeconomic side of things. Because for centuries, science has had to be conservative because the cost of conducting experiments was so high. And so as a result, the experiments were so scarce, I guess. And if experiments are able to get cheap enough, either through the possibility of getting better yields or this or that or whatnot, or even doing these simulated runs, the question is, do we stop testing hypotheses individually and start testing hundreds of them in parallel? I mean, what does that do to how research organizations are going to be built and staffed and budgeted? I mean, are we seeing things head in a direction that is pretty significant there?
I think yes. I still think that the human lab, more traditional scientific workflows, they will have their strengths that I don't see our work with OpenAI and our internal work replaces. But this offers you a new way of getting to those with completely different economics. And like, as we know, like sometimes a 20% like cost improvement or a 30% cost improvement is not that meaningful. Like you can probably build a small business on this or maybe a slightly larger business, but it's only when you have like a literal 10x change in economics or more even, where it's not just, okay, like now we can cut the research budgets by 10. It's just, okay, new things just became possible. The one caveat that I would point here is that we've come across this quite a bit with our customers and early customers especially. One of the things that we solved along the years of the company was molecules. And we still supply molecules to an extent, but like to a very small one. The reason we stopped doing this as a major part of the business is because we would try to deliver molecules as soon as possible. Like customers have expectations for very tight timelines. So we deliver, let's say, in 3 weeks, the first batch of molecules. And then it would sit around for 2-3 months. And we're like, okay, why did we even bother? Why did we do it? It was a bit depressing at times. But then it also pushed us all the way to okay, if we really want to deliver value, this needs to be an end-to-end workflow. And this needs to be if the molecules show up on Tuesday, they're tested on Tuesday or on Wednesday, period. And then we can decide what to do with them, but not to have this period of waiting. Another thought that I have here is one of the really interesting stories about SpaceX, which is obviously now a very different company, not just a space exploration company. But on the space exploration, I had a really interesting story. I once came across a plot where they plotted the cost of bringing 1 kilogram to lower Earth orbit against time. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. It's lowering. That's cool. But I didn't notice the plot is logarithmic. And I'm like, that's interesting. That's okay. I get SpaceX now. This is, of course, an oversimplification, but I think that plot is actually crucial to understand why SpaceX is such an interesting, such a special company. And I think we're just about to enter that phase in scientific discovery and chemical scientific discovery in particular.
The future is looking pretty incredible and pretty bright. This has been a fantastic conversation. I think that everyone listening to this probably has learned a few things and probably is looking at things in a new and different light. If you could take 30 seconds and 30 seconds only and say something to AI curious people that don't have a scientific background, that are a little scared of what's going on and a little curious as to what might be happening out there, if you could give them an elevator pitch on not only what Molecule.one is doing, but also where it's going to lead us, what would you say in that 30 seconds?
The development in AI gives us this incredible opportunity to solve challenges that have just been too hard for humans. And the solutions to them have been dependent on human genius, which is scarce. Now we have the opportunity to move beyond that scarcity and to deliver abundant solutions to hard problems that touch every person's life, like in drug discovery, but also in other disciplines like material science. And as Molecule.one, we want to lead this charge. And we think that by responsibly pairing frontier models, specialist models, AI, the lab, and human judgment, because we still have the best taste, we will get to that future.
That is a very optimistic vision. And I think that's probably a good place for us to wrap this up. Piotr, thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate you being on with us.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Matt. I appreciate you guys.
All right. And for everybody listening, thank you for being with us. And we will catch you next time.